Hello, America. Tonight I want to talk to you about the border, and this is a plea to the president. I think the answer is clear, and you are being torn apart from forces on the outside. If we look and say, what is the single most divisive issue tearing the entire world apart, not just America, the entire world, I think it's easy. No question, it would be immigration. Whether it's immigration policy as a whole, a massive influx of migrants, transnational drug or human smuggling operations, you spin the globe and just close your eyes and point to a country, and every time you'll land on probably some place that is being torn apart right now over the issue of migration. There would be no Brexit if there wasn't mass migration. There's no way the EU would be splintering apart right now without mass migration. Remember, Brexit and the EU, where did those people come from? Let me ask you this, here in the Americas, would Donald Trump be president right now if it wasn't for the government mismanagement on the border, along with a million other things? But that was the main key. I'm not sure he would be. We're being torn apart, and he was the only guy saying, I will solve it. Now, we're not actually being torn apart. To be more accurate, I want to be really clear on this. There's an important distinction. We're being turned inside out. You can be torn apart by accident, but to be turned inside out, that takes careful, coordinated, and engineered strategy, and I'm going to show it to you tonight, and I'll show you who's responsible, and it's way beyond George Soros. It takes a partnership. It takes a partnership between supportive elements pushing down at the top, while you have the foot soldiers pushing up from the bottom, and it squeezes the average person. If you ask any logical person that believes in the rule of law, if they believe the border issue is a crisis, it is obvious. People are living under a bridge. They're living in cages. We know all of this. But here's what we get from the top. Watch.
This is not an emergency, and the president's fear-mongering doesn't make it one. A policy dispute about our southern border does not constitute a national emergency. Democrats support and have always supported strong border security. But the fact is, according to the CBP, apprehensions at our southern border are at historic lows.
Apprehensions are, that's interesting, historic lows. I want you to know, the last time we had a crisis, Barack Obama was in office, and that crisis, the top number was 60,000 people were pouring into our country in 1 month. Well, there were 58,000 apprehensions on the southwest border in January. That number skyrocketed to 76,000 in February. The numbers for just the first 2 months of this year nearly double those of the last 5 years, and the second month is higher than it was in the crisis of Obama. Now, the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was estimating that the numbers for March will be near or over 100,000. That is more than we've seen in over a decade. That's an historic low. Even the Washington Post is calling it record levels and a new high. They called it unprecedented mass migration. The Trump administration is overwhelmed, but I am telling you right now, I claim it is being done intentionally to him. This is Cloward and Piven, wave after wave after wave of people. In October, he ordered over 5,000 troops to the southern border to beef up security. Sounds totally reasonable. This past January, he pressured Mexico to change their immigration policies and to bottleneck migrants coming up from Central America into southern Mexico. Again, totally reasonable. Last week, the Trump administration announced that they were pulling nearly $750 million in aid to Central American countries that are failing to get a hold of the situation. Again, unbelievably reasonable, I think. But none of this has worked. None of it. Meanwhile, the walls are not getting built and the caravans keep trucking north. Why? Congress. Congress and their allies. Top down, bottom up. The president is now at a point where he appears that he's willing to empty the barrel and just start completely over. And Mr. President, you should. Please, I'm begging you. Look to a different solution. You cannot fix a broken arm with painkillers. You have to reset the bone. You have to treat the cause and not the symptom. And I'm going to show you the cause tonight. First, let me start here. This is what I said about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I said George Soros would form a shadow government. He likes to control the airwaves. He destabilizes a state with a crisis, provokes election crisis, begins protests to accuse fraud. That's how he destabilizes nations. I also, every day for the last year I was at Fox, I said these things. Anarchists, Islamists, communists, and socialists would work together against Israel, work together against capitalism, work together to overthrow stability. Protests would become contagious. They would cascade. They would sweep the Middle East. It would lead to a caliphate. It would begin to destabilize Europe and the rest of the world. Here's what we know. Has George Soros formed a shadow government? Yeah. The Democratic Party I was talking about 10 years ago is not the Democratic Party today. It's the new Democratic Party. Control the airwaves? Do I even need to say it? Destabilize the state with crisis. He funded the anarchists in Oakland or Berkeley and Portland, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, and he is currently financing the caravans. Provoke the election crisis. Well, his good buddy was running for president, and they were the ones who found the Russian dossier, and the mainstream media helped them. And they claimed that the president wasn't legitimate. He had worked together. Think about how twisted you have to be to want to believe that the president, I don't care who it is a spy or doing espionage for another country that's an enemy. They were disappointed when that wasn't true. But who was behind all that? The left, the radical left. Now they're talking and taking down the Electoral College. They begin protests and accuse fraud. Do I need to go any further than just the first week after he was inaugurated? Anarchists, Islamists, communists, and socialists. You know, they said, this was the big thing. Oh, he's crazy. Islamists and socialists would never work together. No Islamist would ever work with a socialist. Oh, how right they were again. So, they worked together, anti-Israel, against capitalism, overturning stability. It did cascade. It swept the Middle East. It destabilized, created a caliphate. All those migrants went up. Europe was told, you have to take them by George Soros and his kind. You have to take them, said the European Union. That has destabilized Europe. It has caused Brexit, and now it is spreading to the rest of the world, North America and South America. A storm is coming. There are hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers on backlog, and there are more coming. Caravans are increasing in size and frequency. This is a human wave. The pressure from the bottom up is increasing at an unprecedented rate. I talked about this 9 years ago in 2010. Listen. The bottom up, top down, and inside out theory. Here, you have it, top down. You've got the people in power up at the top, appointed by the president. You have them here. They are organizing the bottom layer. They are organizing people to stand up, to turn us inside out. You have Latinos being organized. You have unions now being organized in the unemployment battle. You have unions in our churches. There's a reason why I played that clip, and it's the last couple of sentences. Latinos organizing in the labor movement, unions in our churches. It's a bottom-up strategy that began in the 1960s as a Mexican nationalist Marxist-Leninist movement. Somehow it culminated into what we're seeing today. But why didn't they have the success in the 60s through the 2000s that they're having today? Because they never had the top-down support structure that they have now in the new Democratic Party. It all began, as I will show you in a minute, as all good progressive stories do, in Chicago. Open borders, sanctuary cities, and migrant caravans designed to overload the system and turn it inside out. It is being orchestrated by a group of Marxists from Chicago, paid for by George Soros and others. It's a family of activists that have been active for decades, and everybody turns their eye. The base of operations, a church. You want to pull it up by the roots? I'll show you how to do it the Chicago way next. All right, if you want to pull it up by the root, you have to look at its goals and who is really spreading the poison. The goal of any bottom-up movement is to apply significant amount of pressure from a small amount of people in order to influence the majority of the country. That in turn affects policy decisions in the government, but none of that works if there isn't a significant influence willing to support them from inside the government or the top. And none of it works at all without exposure in the media via protest rallies or caravans. I want to take you back. We first started hearing about the caravans exactly 1 year ago last month. Last spring, journalists from BuzzFeed embedded with and began reporting on the migrant caravan organized by a group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, or People Without Borders. It seemed weird that they had somebody embedded in something that I had never even heard of. Why? Well, we tracked down the groups associated with them and we found some of the usual suspects. George Soros had put well over $1 million into it, and they apparently put that money to work. The Associated Press reported just a few months ago that People Without Borders had been busy. At the time of that article in December, they were responsible for 4 of the caravans. The AP reported that the group, quote, help charter the route, arrange the bus transportation, negotiate with Mexican officials to provide protection. It also raised more than $46,000 online for emergency housing and food. They're no longer trying to stay under the radar. The press is starting to report on them, and they're eating it up. They're even bragging on social media that they are the, quote, group that accompanied the largest caravan so far. But who are they? Who are the people behind People Without Borders? When I talked about this last April, I noted that very little was known about them, who was behind them. All we had were a few ground operations and the ground operation level organizers. Well, now we have more. So who are they? Well, they're actually a group of nobodies, as long as you consider the who's who in Marxist, Leninist, communist activism based in Chicago, a nobody. We're going to start with Mama Bear, Emma Lozano. She is currently listed now as the executive director of People Without Borders. She's also the head and the founder of another group based out of Chicago called Centro Sin Fronteras, or Center Without Borders. So you got the people and the center. Now, Emma is part of a Marxist activist family that spans decades. Her brother was Rudy Lozano. Rudy, he founded the Center for Autonomous Social Action, or CASA. They were a Marxist-Leninist group that advocated ethnic Mexican class revolution and preached about a world without borders. Back then, Rudy was known as Compañero Rudy, or Comrade Rudy. A study from the UC San Diego described these 2 young activists from Chicago as, and I quote, the latest members of a zealous group of college students, community organizers, and young professionals. They strove to lead and build a national immigrant rights movement vis-a-vis CASA, informed by far-left politics, Marxist-Leninist thought, a communist ideology based on the theories of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, with the international worldview. They called for a collective mobilization. Oh, socialists aren't communists. Really? Because these guys are. Rudy's son, Pepe, now this is Emma's nephew. He's in a new class all by himself. He's another echelon community organizer and activist in Chicago. In 2005, he was a member of the Communist Youth League. Love that. And in 2006, he graduated to just the regular Communist Party USA. He was listed as a member, just a chip off the old block. Now, Dad, unfortunately, was murdered in Chicago, so Rudy is out of the picture. But his sister, Emma, founded Center Without Borders. She did this because she's a true believer in people. Now, People Without Borders would soon follow. But we're not close to exposing the crazy family here. Emma's husband is a man named Walter Coleman. Slim is what they like to call him. I haven't heard that for a while. Anyway, Both Walter and Emma are co-pastors at a church, Lincoln United Memorial Church. Now, this is great because this is another who's who among the Marxists in Chicago. In the late 1980s, he helped elect a woman called Helen Schiller, Chicago City Council. Helen, of course, was a Marxist. She was famous for organizing the white support arm for the Black Panthers, which we all love, called Intercommunal Survival Committee. The Chicago Tribune called her, quote, a career revolutionary. This is starting to sound a little like a twisted version of the Brady Bunch, where Karl Marx is the father and Friedrich Engels, I'm home, sweetheart, donning a blonde wig. But remember, there is no such thing as gender, so that's okay. And the family that engages in revolutionary class warfare together stays together. In 2006, Emma and Walter were both pastors at the United Methodist Church. Now, Coleman, who had been, who'd gone from a relatively quiet, out to pasture kind of days as an activist, suddenly found himself thrust back into Chicago newspapers when he very publicly allowed his church, you'll remember this story. Do you remember her? Elvira? She was so sad. She wasn't a communist. She was just somebody who was here just to make it with her son. And we wanted to send her back. She had been deported in 1997 for fraud, but she re-entered the U.S. the same year and then was rearrested in 2002. But instead of, facing deportation, she just went to church. And she sought refuge with the Marxist Brady Bunch inside. Now, Elvira, under Lozano and Coleman's tutelage, became the face of the growing sanctuary city movement. These are the people that brought that to you. She founded an organization called Latino Families United. It was advocating for sanctuary, amnesty, and a partnership with this organization. Oh. And she had a new idea. How about migrant caravans? Oh, man. Now, how did we find all of this? Well, it's always in the sticky wicket in the details. The address for Coleman's Methodist Church is 2176 West Division Street in Chicago, which is such a coincidence because that happens to be exactly the same address for Latino Families United and People Without Borders. Man, that's a crowded church. Or it's just a small group of revolutionaries that believe in communist rule and are working to destroy our nation and all that we hold dear. But it's really only a small number of people with a ridiculous amount of funding from bottom-up activist organizations. Groups like the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, or Clinic, who I exposed last year as getting funding from George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. The Lozanos work hand in hand with some of the most radical Marxist leftists in the entire country. If the Communist Party USA is pushing an agenda, you are sure to find the Marxist Brady Bunch foot soldiers leading the charge. Here's an ad for a Marxist rally in Chicago against the police. It drew the finest from the far left. Oh, look, there's Angela Davis and the Communist Party USA, and of course, Carol Brady herself. These are the people advocating, organizing, and pushing immigrant rights. They are Marxist, communist activists from Chicago who are leading the charge. Their push for open borders is all about international workers of the world unite. That is a communist idea. And they are being helped also with our own government. Don't think that the new Democratic Party has a problem with Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist communists. They are supporting from the very top. They are supporting and even enabling their mission. People like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, and now the newcomers like Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar. They are the top-down movement, and it's materializing now with their masks fully off. I said there would be a time when that would happen, and we are here, which means we're running out of time. Mr. President, if you want to end this, you have to go to the root, and the root is a communist Marxist infiltration at the highest levels and at the local level. But it goes even further. Ami Horowitz did an interview recently with Judicial Watch after returning from one of the caravans that Emma Lozano's People Without Borders had coordinated. He saw an organizer from another organization giving direct support. Watch.
I would say also what was surprising to me, two more things, actually more than two things, but I'll mention two more things. First of all, mobile hospitals, children's services. The UN is highly involved in getting the caravan through. It was incredible the degree of services that were involved there.
You said UN. Just want to pause for a second. Yeah. Do you know what particular entities or what offices of the UN were involved?
There's a whole number of them. Most prominently was the UN High Commission for Refugees,
right?
UNHCR,
yep.
Which is the organization, and UNICEF. Those are the two most highly profile and the organizations that were largely involved in this thing.
United States of America should not be giving money, billions of dollars, to an organization that stands against us. How much money do we give the UN every year? It's only about $8 billion too much. This is both a UN and U.S. government-supported operation, the Caravan, an operation being driven by radical Marxist communists, and it is being supported by those at the top in Washington. Their goal is to overwhelm the system, to turn our government completely inside out, and we're nearing their end game. Wave after wave after wave of people. That's what's happening. It's the human wave theory. It's a strategy in war. You just keep throwing people at the problem, and pretty soon the system is broken. Who these people are and what their Marxist agenda actually is has been exposed. It's now up to you to get the word to your congressman, to your senator, to the president. Show them this information. Because we are playing a game with the press, and they will never expose this. Do not ever take my word for this. Look all of this stuff up yourself. It's all in the public domain. I have to tell you, today's podcast, Stu and I are both exhausted. It is a whirlwind of a podcast. I recommend you listen to the whole darn thing. We start with the border, George Soros, Chicago, what it's really all about. That's amazing. Then we roll into Blake Harris. This guy is a liberal, a journalist, a really respected writer. Wrote one of the books of the year a few years ago. Now can't get arrested. Now no one will talk to him because he exposes this amazing story about Facebook, Zuckerberg, and the guy who invented Oculus Rift. It's an amazing rags to riches American dream story that is crushed. Why? Because the guy liked Donald Trump. Unbelievable story, and pulling the covers back on Facebook and the mainstream media like crazy.
Let me give you a couple quick other things. We have the BidenBracket.com situation. We're in the Eerie 8 right now. We may, by the time you hear this, be in the Frightening 4. The bottom line is go vote for the most creepy Joe Biden photo possible. Do that today. Tomorrow night is the big Joe Biden show. You got to sign up at blazetv.com/Glenn. Use the promo code Glenn to get access to that. Actually, we're not sure exactly how it's going to happen, but there's two parts to it now. It's been growing in size because there's just so much meat on this bone when it comes to Joe Biden's corruption. We're going to get to that tomorrow. And if you want to see the background of the border with all of it laid out with magnets on the chalkboard, go to glennbeck.com. There's a free YouTube link to the entire show from last night. You really need to see it.
Yeah, and please pass it on to your friends. We end the podcast with Matthew Charles. He was the guy the president introduced at the State of the Union, the guy who had been in prison for 21 years. They release, and then 2 years later, they're like, oh, whoops, that was a mistake. You got to go back to prison for 10 years. Amazing story, and a really good guy. That and all the rest of it on today's podcast.
You're listening to the best of the Glenn Beck program.
So last night on TV, and we're going to try to make this episode available on YouTube sometime during the show today, because I want everybody to see it, because you have to understand what's happening. And I would so appreciate if you would alert the people in Congress that you trust, have them send them this episode so they can watch it, and alert them to what's really going on. Last night, I was talking about the president. He is getting to a point now where he's willing to do whatever it takes to secure the border. But we're looking at the wrong place. We're looking at the border as the problem. That is not the problem. And let me explain. There were two chalkboards that I have done when I was at Fox, and they were both very, very important, and they still stand the test of time, because one of them has just finished being true. Everything that I put on there was a prediction, and it's all now complete, and it's a really important chalkboard. So let me go through two of them. Here's what I said 10 years ago, that George Soros was building a shadow government. Now, George Soros, we have done episode after episode after episode, and there's a really good episode by this guy named Mr. Reagan that you should watch. He has gone and he has updated some of the George Soros stuff, and it's very, very complete and really, really well done. Just Google Mr. Reagan or YouTube and follow him. He's really good at laying things out. What I said at the time was George Soros has this pattern, and this is the way he overthrows countries. One, he forms a shadow government, and a shadow government is for the top-down, bottom-up, inside-out theory, that you need enough people at the top in government that are working, coordinating with the grassroots level. When you have those two, you can apply pressure on everybody in the middle, and that's you, the forgotten man. So form a shadow government, then control the airwaves. Then the third step he always takes is destabilize the state with a crisis. Now, that crisis can be an economic crisis. It can be an already happening crisis that you just exploit. Fourth step, provoke an election crisis. Fifth step, begin protests and accuse fraud. Those are the 5 steps that George Soros always follows when he's trying to overthrow a country. And I contend he's trying to overthrow the United States of America. He is an open borders guy. This is important for you to understand, because when you talk about open borders, what does that mean? People will say open borders. Well, we can all just, go on and be free. Libertarians mean it one way, open borders, that we should be able to work and do whatever we want without the government interference. Okay, that's one way to look at it. But that is not the way George Soros looks at it. George Soros is not a libertarian. George Soros loves big government. So when you hear people talk about open borders and they like big government, it can be, and in most cases, a sign that they are Marxist-Leninists. Because, remember, the difference between the Nazis and the commies was not socialism, it was nationalism. Russia and the communists, the Marxist-Leninists, wanted to have socialism on an international scale. So workers of the world unite. There are no borders. It's one world and one world government. The National Socialists said, I don't want to fight for another country. If I fight for my country will be strong because my workers will fight for the other workers in my country. But they're not going to fight for somebody in a far-off, distant land. So it's not international workers, it's national workers. So when you hear about no borders, it can be a sign that this is a Marxist-Leninist movement. All right. Let's go over whether George Soros has done what he said he would do. Form a shadow government. I contend that is the new Democratic Party. I contend that it is all of the radicals that are in there right now. In fact, Stu, why was Jesse Smollett let off, or who let him off?
Who let him? I mean, Fox you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
What's her name? Nikki Fox?
Her last name is Fox. I don't remember her first name.
Do you know how she was elected?
I mean, she was brought into as like a kind of a radical opposition to the
you know
status
who funded
quo.
her?
Was it
George Soros?
Yeah, I mean,
okay,
because he has projects, and he did this with secretaries of state.
Yep, save our
He did it with
SOS.
district attorneys.
Yes.
Yeah.
He concentrated on local government. First he did the national, then local, and all of those people all the way along. And he has formed a government, a shadow government, that thinks like he does, and they're radicals. They're mainly Marxists, okay? So I contend if you look at the new Democratic Party, you'll see that's a shadow government. They are not looking to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. They are looking to overthrow the free market system. 2, control the airwaves. I don't think we even need to address that. But let me just say this. Have you noticed how if you speak out against George Soros, the media goes absolutely apoplectic? You are immediately deemed a anti-Semite. I have nothing. I've won the Defender of Israel award from ZOA, and it was presented by Benjamin Netanyahu. So I don't think I'm an anti-Semite. With that being said, because I talked to you about George Soros, I'm an anti-Semite. No. And I don't believe he was a Nazi. I've never condemned him for what he did in World War II. Some people will claim he collaborated. I don't think so. I think he was just doing what he had to do to survive, and I do not blame him for any of that, nor do I condemn him for that. What I question is the fact that he never has dealt with it. He never felt it was a problem at all. I'm sorry, but you can't take land away from your fellow Jews while working with the Nazis and not feel something. I'm not saying that you feel guilt or something, but you have to feel something. He didn't. That disturbs me greatly because it says something about him being able to bury feelings and deep, deep feelings. So, control the airwaves. He absolutely has a handle on that through the new Democratic Party. Destabilize the state with a crisis. Well, he helped fund Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street. He has funded the riots in Berkeley. I mean, look at what he's done. And he is now funding the caravans. That's really important to remember. So is he destabling the state with a crisis? Yes, little by little. Then provoke an election crisis. We were so close to an election crisis in the last 3 years or 2 years. We have been told that this election was stolen, that this election wasn't legit, that this election was hacked by the Russians, and Donald Trump was part and parcel of that. They wanted this election crisis so badly that when it has been proven that Donald Trump did not collude with the Russians, they're disappointed. They want it. They need it to be true. That's critical. They need it to be true. Why? Because of number 5. Begin protests, have the streets start themselves on fire, and accuse fraud. Now look at what's happening. Who gave the Russian dossier? It was the Clinton people. Who started Media Matters with George Soros? Oh, that's right. It was the Clintons. Now we're starting to see this big move about the Electoral College. I have not checked into this, but I will bet you that big money is coming from George Soros on that front as well. And when we talk about accuse fraud and begin protests, do I need to say anything more than the Women's March that happened the weekend of inauguration? What were they doing? He wasn't a legitimate president. So George Soros has done what he said he would do. This plays a role into what is happening on our border, and you have to understand it. Now, let me give you one more chalkboard quick. This is the one that I said every day the last year of Fox. Every day. There was a chalkboard that I said anarchists, Islamists, communists, and socialists would all work together. Last night on the TV show, I pointed out the main problem with this, there were two problems. People said there would never be a caliphate. That was a pipe dream or some sort of whiskey nightmare. And they also said Islamists and socialists would never work together. Well, I kind of took that apart last night. Because what would you call AOC? A socialist. What is Ilhan Omar? An Islamist. They seem to be working together, don't they? And what are those goals? Work together against Israel. Yeah, that's done. Work together against capitalism. That's done. Work together to overturn stability. That's done. I said, this is at the time, that the protests that these guys were working together on in the Middle East would become contagious. They would cascade. They would sweep the Middle East, and it would lead to a caliphate. All of those things happen. But here's what they miss. It would then, the last part was, it would begin to destabilize Europe and the rest of the world. Has Europe been destabilized? Yes. How has it been destabilized? Because of the protests that became contagious, that cascaded, that swept the Middle East, that caused the caliphate. All of those displaced people went someplace, and they were all aided by people like George Soros and Hillary Clinton. You've got to take them, Europe. Without the caliphate, without the Middle East on fire, you wouldn't have had the mass migration, which would later then, as we now know, set the entire European continent on fire and lead to things like Brexit. The last part of that is it would then spread to the rest of the world. That brings me to the border. And I have information that is, you can look it up yourself. Who is doing the caravan? What is the real goal? Is this spontaneous? No. This is directly from what I said would happen. It is happening, and my research department has buttoned it up, and I will give you those facts in 1 minute. Okay, it is really important to understand that top down, bottom up, inside out is a movement that must have people in the government coordinating with the people on the ground to turn a country inside out. To tear it apart, it can be torn apart by accident. But to turn it inside out, it has to have carefully laid plans. So last year, it was almost exactly a year ago that we started talking about the caravans. At the time, I said these caravans are what is coming. Now, this is something that I have not told you, I think, until this week. I've never said this on the air before. But I believe there is a time that is coming, and Stu will tell you I've talked about this for probably 10 years, but I've never said it on the air. I believe there is a time that is coming that our borders are going to be so overwhelmed, and people are going to be coming into our country, and it is going to change and become very ugly. And people are going to demand their land back. People from Central and South America and Mexico are going to demand their land back. And they will kill farmers. And they will take that land. Now, I hope to God that that never happens. I haven't said that. I've believed that for 10 years plus. But I've not said that because there was no indication that that kind of stuff would happen, except you have to extrapolate so much. But you are now getting real anger. You're getting desperation and a volatile situation to where you're starting to, you have people feeding people hatred. Our open borders policy, the sanctuary cities, the migrant caravans, they are all designed to overload the system almost in a Cloward and Piven way. And the president needs to understand and needs to fight this a different way. His instincts are right. He's fired everybody. His instincts are right. But I don't think he has anybody around him that can tell him what the root of the problem is. You will never fix a broken arm with painkillers. You have to fix the root of the problem.
The best of the Glenn Beck program.
Hey, it's Glenn, and I want to tell you about something that you should either end your day with or start your morning with, and that is the news and why it matters. If you like this show, you're going to love the news and why it matters. It's a bunch of us that all get together at the end of the day and just talk about the stories that matter to you and your life. The news and why it matters. Look for it now wherever you download your favorite podcast. Blake Harris, he's an author of a book, The History of the Future, Oculus, Facebook, and the Revolution That Swept Virtual Reality. I am so fascinated by virtual reality because it is, once you really experience great virtual reality, you see how powerful this is going to be. I mean, I don't see people really leaving their house very much after virtual reality, quite honestly. But the story of the guy who came up with Oculus has really been lost. I didn't even know this, and it is a fascinating story. Blake is here with us now. Hi, Blake. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'm glad that you've tried good virtual reality and seen that it's going to change the future.
Oh, my gosh, it is. And I'm not sure. I mean, it's going to change it in good ways, and I also see us kind of ending up like what was that Pixar movie where they're all big fat on a spaceship? And
WALL-E.
Yeah, WALL-E. I mean, I can see us all kind of turning into that as well. And we'll get into that here in a second. Can you just tell us the story of Oculus and what happened and who first invented that and the story of this kid?
Sure. So this all happened back in 2012, so 7 years ago. And, for however much your listeners know about virtual reality now, back then, even less people knew or cared about it. Essentially back in 2012, virtual reality was a technological punchline along the lines of, flying cars or jetpacks.
Correct.
The thing that was like, a sci-fi trope that was maybe going to happen but never did, and it was silly that we ever thought it would. And most people had just given up caring about it, thinking it would happen, except there was a young man out there, a guy named Palmer Luckey, which is a real name, even though it sounds kind of like a fictional character name that's perfect for my book.
Yeah.
And so this kid, this 19-year-old kid, Palmer Luckey, he was living in a trailer in Long Beach, California, and he was just obsessed with virtual reality. He once described his trailer to me, and I said, Palmer, that basically sounds like the meth van on Breaking Bad, except your trailer has been retrofitted to build virtual reality headsets. And he said, yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it looked like. And so, so imagine this little 19-year-old mad scientist building virtual reality headsets, and he basically cracked the code that had eluded so many scientists and tech people and sci-fi lovers for years, and built this virtual reality headset called the Oculus Rift. And I would say the rest is history, but the rest is a book. The rest is this company, Oculus, that less than 2 years later, he sold to Facebook for over $2 billion. And,
wow.
We're still in the early phases of virtual reality and where it's headed. But, you really got to admire the young man for having this ambition and this passion for this thing that we all thought was kind of silly back then.
Okay, so I was at Facebook right after they purchased this. and they were all excited. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And then you don't hear anything about it. And we're still waiting for real good virtual reality. What the hell happened?
Well, the Facebook of it all had a really big impact. So back then, a large part of Palmer's motivation was that he was a gamer. And so for him, he wanted to just step through the computer screen and actually enter a game and feel like it was all around him. And so gaming was the initial focus. They did a Kickstarter campaign. They thought they were going to try to raise $400,000. They raised $3 million. And, their slogan was step into the game. So it was all about gaming. And then once they sold to Facebook, Facebook's interest was not so much the gaming. It was insert whatever you want to describe, social engineering or, communication, whatever the case may be. And so that's a big part of why it's stalled out for the past few years. But they actually are releasing a headset called the Oculus Quest, which is going to be the most affordable and most technologically sophisticated headset that's going to cost $400. And that comes out next month. And then you have the big question that I keep getting asked by people is, this is by far the best, most affordable headset, but Facebook owns it, and I don't trust them. What should I do? Should I buy it? And I don't have a very good answer for that right now.
It's amazing how Facebook has just blown their trust. Let me ask you something off topic, and then I'll get back to the story. Mark Zuckerberg keeps saying things like, you know what, we're going to come out with this product, we're going to do this product, and then that doesn't happen. Is he even in control of his own company anymore?
I would say that he actually is absolutely in control of his own company.
Okay.
More than any other CEO. Mark announced about a year and a half ago that he was going to give 99% of his money away to charity, which sounds a lot nicer and simpler than it actually is. Not to say that there's a nefarious plot behind it, but basically he still has the majority voting share because of how he structured the stock. And I would say that Facebook is more like a dictatorship than any other Silicon Valley company that I've ever researched. And I'm sure we'll get to it in terms of why Palmer ended up leaving Facebook against his will and the politics of it all. But that was really all driven by Mark directly.
Yeah, because the politics of it are really interesting. There's a Trump tie to this story, and it's a fascinating one. It's one we've heard many times in other industries. But for some reason
fascinating that it is this level, and you've never heard it. We'll get to that. Yep. Blake, we're going to take a 1-minute break, and then we'll come back. The name of the book that is laying this out is The History of the Future by Blake Harris. We'll continue our conversation with him in just a second. First,
talking to Blake Harris, the book is The History of the Future. I would also highly recommend his book, Console Wars. I mean, he's a great author. Blake is with us. And so far, Blake, really what you have here is a great American entrepreneurial story, right? This kid who is in a trailer, he brings virtual reality from nothing to a $2 billion sale at Facebook. You know, the technology is questionable about where it's going at this point with Facebook. But the exit of the inventor of this is a fascinating story.
So I mean, to me, I don't know how familiar you are with my writing, but everything I write, I always try to write with my grandmother in mind. You know, how can I get her interested in this tech story? How can I get her interested in Sega and Nintendo? And so to me, this was always just a story of the American dream in 2012, 2016, 2019, more so than it was about virtual reality. And then the final third of the book becomes this other monstrosity, which I guess might actually be a good lens into the perversion of the American dream, just with how politics weighs into everything. But I also just want to say, you mentioned right before the break that it's sort of astonishing how much Facebook has burned our trust over the past few years, and that's true for me. They gave me unprecedented, almost unlimited access. So I had a pretty high opinion of them just for my own selfish reasons. But what I came to discover during my research, before my access was eventually cut off because of what I discovered, was just really, really immoral and terrible. And then also I should mention that I'm a lifelong liberal, not a fan at all of Trump. So, as we'll get into now, like what I found, I certainly wasn't looking for a sympathetic Trump supporter story, but that's what I found.
Wow. Okay, so tell us the story.
Sure. So in September of 2016, so this was like 6 weeks before the presidential election, there was an article that came out about Palmer Luckey, about the inventor of Oculus, and the headline was Facebook billionaire secretly funding Trump's meme machine. And the insinuation, explicitly and implicitly, was that, every terrible meme that you've seen online for the past election season, everything misogynistic, anti-Semitic, hateful, etc., that Palmer was like running a troll factory and that he was the person behind it all. And that just wasn't true at all. The truth was that he made a slightly less than $10,000 donation to a political organization that was pro-Trump, that was planning to put up billboards across the country. And I always kind of wonder how people would have reacted if they just had known the truth, because in Silicon Valley, they might have reacted just as badly. But anyway, he's so unpopular in such a short amount of time, to the extent that, one of my favorite publications, at least previously, Wired, you'd think sort of an even-headed publication, non-sensationalistic. Their headline in the midst of this was that their headline was that Palmer Luckey is the worst. That's it. Palmer Luckey is the worst. And so there was this, PR crisis, and naturally, Palmer wanted to write a statement to set out what was true and what was not true about the media reports, and to say that he was a Trump supporter, but that, this trolling thing and all these other aspects were not true. So he wrote a statement. This happened on a Thursday night. He was not allowed to post it. He was not allowed to say that he was a Trump supporter.
Oh my gosh.
As it went up the flagpole at Facebook to the executive level, which I found, initially hard to believe that was actually the case. But then I certainly believed it was the case, because I was able to finally obtain the email records of it. And I learned that the reason that it took so long for him to post his eventual statement was that Mark Zuckerberg weighed in. Mark Zuckerberg personally drafted the statement that Palmer had to post. And the statement that he drafted said that Palmer would be voting for Gary Johnson. So not Trump. That was too unacceptable to say he was a Trump supporter. And so he had to post a statement saying that he supported Gary Johnson, written by Mark himself. And, he did that in order to save his job.
Wait. But he wasn't voting for Gary Johnson.
Correct. That makes it illegal and unethical that he would be directed by the head of one of the most powerful organizations to say that he was supporting a politician that he wasn't.
Wow.
That was, yeah.
So
I couldn't believe it myself.
So wait a minute. So how is it that a guy with $2 billion from Facebook doesn't sue Facebook for this? Doesn't press charges?
Well, part of it was at the time, I interviewed over 200 people for the book, and so I talked to some of the people that he confided to and asked for advice from about should he post a statement that was illegal and that he didn't agree with. And their response was basically, yes, you could sue Facebook and potentially win, but you wouldn't be at the company anymore, and it would take years. And more than anything, Palmer wanted to remain at the company. It was his baby. It was what he had done with most of his adult life. Granted, it was a short adult life at that time. He was only 24. But yeah, I mean, he has a very strong case if he ever wants to pursue legal action. I assume that he signed an NDA of some kind that prevents that when he's eventually fired. But yeah, he was eventually fired. He basically, after he posted that statement, he was put on permanent vacation. Facebook employees were told that Palmer wanted to take time off of work. It was framed as Palmer's decision. One of my favorite and saddest moments is Palmer's waiting to come back a couple weeks later, and he's participating in a town hall call by conference, or actually not participating because he was not allowed to interact with anyone. And he was listening, and he found out during this meeting that he had asked for 6 more weeks of vacation.
Okay, hang on. I got to take a break. We'll come back. This is nuts. Behind the scenes inside of Facebook and Palmer Luckey, the guy who invented Oculus, and how he was forced out because he was a Trump supporter. The name of the book is History of the Future. We're talking to Blake Harris, who's really fascinating. He's written a book called The History of the Future, Oculus, Facebook, and the Revolution that Swept Virtual Reality. But it is interesting to me that he is a liberal, doesn't necessarily like Donald Trump, and really liked Facebook going in, had unprecedented access. And then when the inventor of Oculus, this entrepreneur, this 20-some-year-old kid, sells to Facebook, and the election heats up, all of a sudden he is in trouble with Facebook, and they force him to put out a deal that says he's not voting for Trump, he's voting libertarian, when that wasn't the truth. He plays ball. He's told to go take a vacation. They frame it as he's decided to. He's on a conference call, and he finds out that he had asked for even more vacation. And you know what's coming at the end of this. We pick it back up with Blake Harris, who, Blake, I have to tell you, I love people who, I may disagree with sometimes vehemently on things, but are open-minded enough to go, well, yeah, but this part is true or this part is true, and just let the chips fall where they may. You're a very rare species. I don't know if you know that.
No, thank you. And unfortunately, I've come to realize that, or to believe that is the case. My book was originally due to HarperCollins. The manuscript was due in September of 2016, the same month that this all went down. And I ended up spending an extra 2 years, for no pay working on this thing, because this is a crazy story. And you mentioned earlier that, you hadn't really heard about this. And it sounds kind of bonkers because, every other Facebook scandal to date, Mark Zuckerberg is not directly involved, and he could always sort of throw up his arms and say, oh, I didn't know, or, that was some other person's fault. But he is the one who personally wrote this statement, which was just bad for him to even put that in email. And you're like, how is this not national news? How is this not breaking news? But then I talked to other journalists, and I understand why. These are journalists I know under the context of they read my first book about Sega Nintendo and loved it. So I think they have a somewhat positive opinion of me. And I reached out to a lot of them to tell them that they had the story wrong. And I offered to send them evidence. I told them I was the only person who actually interviewed all the participants in this and had all the archival information. And they basically said, yeah, but who cares? He's a Trump supporter. So maybe it's inaccurate, but so what? And
wow.
And if I had told that to my mom and she said that, I still would be kind of bummed that she didn't care about what was true and what was not. But these are journalists. This is their job. And then when I told them, not only was the reporting about Palmer wrong, but the reason he was fired was for political discrimination, they almost laughed in my face to say, yeah, but that's not the kind of discrimination I care about. And political discrimination is perhaps probably, less of a persistent issue than other forms of discrimination. But when it happens, it's still bad. We can all agree upon that, I thought. Though apparently not. So
are you finding anyone starting to wake up, Blake? Is there anyone? Because, I know on the right, I have found a few people that are, in fact, several, that are like, I'm out. I'm done with this. I'll call balls and strikes, and, my side screws up. I don't care. I will say that they're screwed up here because this is insane. Are you finding anybody that is starting to open their eyes to what is being created?
Unfortunately, less than you'd expect. I being a liberal and existing in probably some sort of liberal bubble, Election Day was a wake-up call for me. I was very upset, but my thought was, okay, the voice of half the country, the majority, the Electoral College has spoken. I should actually listen to them because I find Trump repugnant, but they don't, and they are my fellow citizens. Let me figure out what I'm missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to do that. And I feel like for the 24 hours after the election, a lot of other liberals were in a similar boat of, we got to talk to the other side. And then they instead decided to just double down and say, no, these people are just stupid, or they don't understand that they're voting against their self-interest or whatever. And so you would have thought that more people would be waking up and just want to call balls and strikes and say, all right, I don't like Trump, or I don't agree with his approach on this, but I actually think his strategy here was a good one. And that's not the case. Like, you mentioned right before you had me on that your show from last night was now on YouTube talking about the border in a non-political way. And I found myself almost laughing because on the left, there's no such thing as non-political.
Yeah.
Specifically in Silicon Valley, there was a story last week that 2 weeks ago, Google had put together an ethics board for artificial intelligence.
This is crazy.
That sounds like a pretty good idea.
Yeah, really good.
Within less than a week later, it was disbanded because there was so much outrage internally at Google because one of the participants was a conservative.
Yeah, the Heritage Foundation, which is not the Heritage Foundation. You got to be kidding me. That's a radical group to them?
Exactly. And that's really what I found in so many ways. And it seeps into so much of what Facebook does as a company internally and also externally in the product. It's like this idea that, all opinions, all political opinions are equal. But then this animal farm-esque way, it's like, but some are more equal than others. And, every conservative perspective it's not just another opinion. It's not a different way of looking at things. It's not they might be right, I might be right. It's just a value judgment. It's if you do it one by one, it's all wrong. It's all harmful. It needs to be fought against, which is kind of crazy. Because
does it concern you that the people like this, or Zuckerberg, a guy who you went in admiring, the power that they have, and now the growing collusion or partnering with the United States government, does that keep you up at night?
It does. I haven't slept very well, Glenn. I haven't slept very well. Yeah. No, it does. Yeah, I mean, I think you see now that people, Facebook is no longer the tech darlings. Maybe connecting the world didn't turn out to be the best idea. Now people are starting to look into Facebook and discover these scandals. A lot of times they're things that happened years ago. And it's not surprising that these things happen. It's such a sloppy company. And they don't like, I guess one of the first ways that I really realized that what I was uncovering actually fit with the culture there was, one of their top executives who'd been there since the beginning. He would routinely share stories during the election season, like there's no such thing as a good Trump supporter. Well, I mean, there's Trump supporters of Facebook. They learned pretty quickly not to talk about it. In fact, the Palmer one is kind of interesting because 4 months before, he was outed as a Trump supporter as the worst person, part of the issue was that he made his donation for $10,000 anonymously. And 4 months earlier, he had been at a Trump rally and been willing to appear on camera at a Trump rally. Like he seemed to have no issue with being associated with Trump. But then in between, what happened was Peter Thiel was revealed to be a Trump supporter. Everyone at Facebook, not everyone, a lot of people at Facebook tried to get him fired off the board for that reason alone. And not just employees, but Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, who was also a board member, believed that demonstrated enough bad judgment that Peter should not be on the board. And so Palmer realized, I should probably not be vocal about my support. And that was probably wise, because when it was revealed that he was a Trump supporter, he didn't end up at the company anymore.
Blake, two more from me. First of all, the idea that there's no such thing as a good Trump supporter was pretty widespread at this time, particularly in the media and through a lot of these tech companies. And obviously that's, a completely unfair thing. However, at that time, there was a lot of really bad stuff on the internet that was associated with Trump supporters. Was there any evidence that Palmer Luckey participated in anything really bad when it comes to, some of the darkest sides of that election?
Absolutely not. And wow. I have essentially staked my career on this. So, like I said, I spent an extra 2 years on this. I didn't just willy-nilly decide, oh no, he's a good guy, or he didn't do anything wrong. Like, I looked very deeply into his online activities, and spent, I think, 20 hours interviewing the founder of the organization that he donated to, because, it was alleged that these were white supremacists, and I didn't want to just have one phone call because, who knows, maybe he was lying to me to try to protect his image. But I've spoken to Palmer almost every day for the past 3 years. I've spent years looking into all this stuff. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing, and I would bet my life that he did not do anything that we would consider beyond the pale.
Wow.
or unacceptable.
Wow. And the last one, Blake, is you mentioned it about your career. Do you have one after this book? Because not only are you fighting for a Trump supporter, which is not something you're supposed to be doing, but also, you got access to Facebook. You were able to get an incredibly detailed account because of that access. And now because you're being honest here, they are no longer going to be fans of yours. People in the future are going to be hesitant to give you access to the next thing.
Yep. That's pretty much what I expect to happen. But, the only thing I published while I was sort of undercover on Facebook for these past couple of years was an article called "This is How Fake News Happens," and it was all publicly available information. I wanted everyone to just be able to see here's what actually happened, and here's how it was reported, and here's how this crazy game of telephone happened to make it even worse. And the response to that, was like 50% of people saying, "Oh, thank you for pointing out that the media messed up here with Palmer," and then 50% of people calling me a Nazi, even though I was happily bar mitzvahed. I think that's weird. I would be a Nazi.
Yeah, it's a strange choice.
I got the Defender of Israel award from Benjamin Netanyahu, and I also am anti-Semitic somehow or another.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. And so, people call me Nazi, white supremacist, whatever, complicit, blah, blah, blah. And that was the reaction I kind of expected. But instead what happened is that it's been almost 100% positive. And then there's just been silence from, my first book won, gaming awards, and I was named, a gaming personality of the year.
Oh, yeah,
and
totally.
as of now, the book's been out for a month or so, and there has been zero coverage of it on any tech or gaming mainstream website.
Wow.
Are you kidding me?
Wow.
That is incredible. I'm surprised there's not more pickup, too, from conservative media on it because,
here's the thing.
That was not your goal, but, it's a really big story.
Here is the thing. This is an amazing book. I already own a book. I'm holding a copy of it, but this I got from the publisher. Let me just show this so you know that I'm telling you the truth. I just ordered another copy on Amazon because I want to support you. You and I probably disagree politically on, 90% of stuff. It doesn't matter. We have to have people who are willing to open their eyes and see the truth and let the chips fall where they may. I ask every member of this audience, if you have Kindle, it'll cost you $14. How much? I don't know how much it is as a hardbound. But buy this book. It's a great book. You're going to really enjoy it. It's an unbelievable story. But you're also supporting somebody who needs the support. Somebody who doesn't agree with you, but is willing to tell the truth. We have to reward those people on both sides that are trying to do their best. Blake, I really admire you, and I hope that we can meet. I'd love to have you on for a podcast, but I really admire you, and congratulations. Thank you, and let us know any way we can help you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Take care.
You bet. Blake Harris, The History of the Future. The History of the Future. That is a crazy story.
How is that not a bigger deal? And on conservative media, for example, how is that? The guy invented something that's game changing. Facebook buys it for $2 billion and he gets forced out because he went to a Trump rally, and that is not everywhere. How am I not seeing that on Twitter?
I'm seeing this about people. I saw 4 stories today about people harassing people in a Trump hat.
Yeah,
this is a guy
is way bigger than
this is gigantic. This is illegal, as Blake said.
Yeah.
This is illegal what they did. And nothing?
Wow.
This book, if you are a fan of other shows on the right, urge them to have Blake on to tell this story. This is a very important story. This tells you everything you need to know about Silicon Valley. Listen to this guy. He's not on our side. He's a liberal. But he was disgusted by what he saw. And he's telling the truth. We have to help him get the word out. Please buy this book, The History of the Future. I'd love to see this go up. I don't even know where it is on the charts. It's probably nowhere on the charts. Let's help him. The History of the Future by Blake Harris.
This is the best of the Glenn Beck program.
The Blaze Radio Network. On demand.
Glenn, I don't recall what time of day it was where my article went live. But I remember it was Saturday, and within 30 minutes of being published, I had already been called a Nazi, a white supremacist, a stupid effing liar. In fact, a longtime friend, one of my college roommates actually, even texted me and said that he was embarrassed for me and that it was really sad that I had gone from a writer with so much promise to a misguided MAGA apologist. I vividly recall reading that text message. As I did, I wanted to crumble. I wanted to evaporate. I wanted to go back in time and never have started work on this book in the first place. I remember specifically thinking, this is supposed to be a book about a scrappy tech company filled with colorful characters. This was supposed to be a book that had nothing to do with politics. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, what's the point? Why was I going out of my way to try to set a record straight for a multimillionaire whose political views I often disagreed with and who had supported a presidential candidate that I found repugnant? Why hadn't I just picked another fun-loving, beloved topic like Sega and Nintendo, my last book? That would make everybody happy and nostalgic to read. And I would earn applause from everyone, and the press, and the pride from my friends. For several minutes, I sat there feeling sorry for myself, continuing to wonder again and again, what was the point? What was the point of continuing to push my deadline to try to dig deeper into what really had happened? And then for all my extra works, met with little more than ire. Seriously, what was the point? And then, aided by a refreshing cup of coffee, the answer became overwhelmingly obvious. Because that's what journalism is. You follow the story wherever it takes you, and never, however tempting it may be, the other way around. You follow leads. You examine evidence. You continue to dig deeper and deeper until you get to it. You get to the truth, not for the praise you think you deserve, not to try to be everybody's best friend, but because however fast or partisan or cynical the world has gotten, the truth still matters. It still matters so much. So much that from that moment forward, I knew chasing the truth was more important than whatever it might cost me and my career, especially because I could afford it, both literally due to the success of my first book and figuratively due to my having front row seats to see what Lucky Palmer had gone through, going from a beloved high-tech wonderkin to Silicon Valley's biggest pariah. And my knowing, no matter how bad things might end up for me, they'd never be worse than what he had already gone through. This is from a private letter that I received from Blake Harris. I got it a couple of nights ago, and I asked for his permission to share it. He's with us on the phone now. The book that he wrote that has cost him his career and his friends and his standing is The History of the Future. When he was on the program, 3 days ago, his book was 33,332. Last night, I got word that it hit number 4. The only exposure that he had had up until this program was this program. No one wanted to support him because of the truth of this book. Half of it is about the miracle of the free market and inventors and how one kid in a trailer can change the world. Then it takes a political turn, and not by his choice. Welcome to the program, Blake Harris.
Thank you so much for having me on. And I texted your producer the other day and also wrote in that email that my job is literally to come up with words, but I am still sort of speechless. Before we get into it, I really just want to thank you again so much and your listeners and your viewers, to go from my book being ranked 33,000 to number 3 and even surpassed number 4. Number 3.
We're going to get it to number 1. Blake, you're going to have a number 1 bestseller.
It's obvious. It's life-changing. And beyond it being the greatest feeling in the world, a close second is just the dozens of letters that I've received from your listeners over the past few days, just saying thank you. I mean, like to the point that I made in that email. No one was saying thank you, and that's not why I do it. But it's certainly nice to hear.
Yeah, I know.
And to hear it from people who probably have pretty different views than me. That's wonderful, because the point, who cares? It's irrelevant. It's not about left and right. It's about right and wrong,
I tell you, Blake, the media gets much of America wrong. And the left and the right get much of America wrong. We're not as focused on winning as we are living truth and letting the chips fall where they may. We are very interested in everybody being free and being able to express who they want to what they want to express, and very much into. I've at the height of my Fox days and for years after, one of my key people on the daily line of production was a San Francisco progressive that voted absolutely every time the complete opposite of me. And we're good friends. I appreciated her counsel. I asked for her counsel. I mean, it was an important thing to work and have many different views around me. Otherwise, you just get trapped in an echo chamber. And I think people are sick of my way or the highway.
Well, that's what makes these conversations even more important and timely, is that at the end of the day, Palmer Luckey is just a proxy for what is going on with big tech. He is a high-profile story, but it's a story that so many people have experienced to some degree. Either it's happened to a friend, some sort of censorship, and Facebook's my way or the highway mentality is just going to keep getting stronger unless we push back on it.